What I learned after buying a used car. Chapter 1. The First Domino. You know what I've learned? The scariest stories usually don't start with something scary. They start with something ordinary. A new job, a move, a phone call, buying a used car. It's only later, when you look back, that you realize those ordinary moments were the beginning of everything. At the time, you don't see the first domino fall. You only hear the last one hit the floor. For years, I told people this story started with the car. That made sense. The car was the part people remembered. It was the unusual part. But the older I get, the less I believe anything starts where we think it does. Take a leaf falling from a tree. You see it drift through the air and land in somebody's yard. It looks random. Maybe the wind pushed it left. Maybe it turned twice before coming down. Maybe it landed beside the sidewalk instead of in the street. But none of that was really random. The branch mattered. The wind mattered. The weight of the leaf mattered. The angle it broke loose from mattered. Even the temperature probably had something to do with it. You only saw where it landed. You didn't see everything that had to happen first. My life worked the same way. If I hadn't been living in downtown Chicago, none of this would have happened. I spent most of my adult life there. Same apartment for almost 9 years, 3rd floor, old building, steam pipes that knocked in the winter. A radiator that either didn't work at all or made the place feel like July. The train ran close enough that, if my windows were open, I could hear the brakes squeal when it came into the station. Some people might have found that annoying. I got used to it. After a while, the noise became part of the apartment. You noticed it more when it stopped. I never owned a car. Never really wanted one. In Chicago, a car felt like one more bill. Insurance, parking, repairs, snow, finding a spot, and then being afraid to leave because somebody else would take it. I had a license. I knew how to drive. I just didn't do it very often. If I needed groceries, I walked. There was a small store a few blocks away. I knew exactly how much I could carry home without regretting it halfway there. 2 bags. Maybe 3 if one of them was light. If I wanted dinner, I walked. If I wanted to meet friends, I took the train. If the weather was bad, I called a rideshare. Most mornings, I left my apartment with coffee in one hand and my work bag over my shoulder. I'd walk past the same bakery, the same newsstand, and the same man who sold flowers near the station. I didn't know his name. He didn't know mine, but we nodded at each other almost every day. That was enough. My life wasn't exciting, but it worked. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my boss asked if I had a minute. Whenever your boss says that, your mind starts going through everything you've done wrong. At least mine does. Did I miss a deadline? Say something in a meeting? Forget to send an email? I followed him into his office and sat down. He closed the door. That didn't help. Then he smiled. I've got some good news. I'd been trying to move into management for almost 3 years. I'd applied twice. The first time, they gave it to somebody with more experience. The second time, the position disappeared before they filled it. After that, I told myself I wasn't going to get my hopes up again. But I kept volunteering for projects, stayed late when I needed to, helped train new people, did all those things you do when you want somebody to notice you without looking like you're begging to be noticed. Apparently somebody had. The promotion came with more money, a better title, my own team. It was the kind of offer I'd spent years waiting for. There was only one condition. I had to relocate. I remember leaning back in the chair. How far? He told me the city. I won't use its real name. There are still people there who remember parts of what happened, and I'd rather not pull them into this. It was several states away, big enough to have traffic, not big enough to have a train system that could get you where you needed to go. My boss must have seen something on my face. You don't have to answer today. But I already knew what I was going to say. Opportunities like that don't come around often. At least that's what I told myself. I asked a few questions. Start date, relocation package, who I'd report to, what the team looked like. Normal questions, practical questions, the kind of questions that make you feel like you're making a careful decision. By the time I left his office, the folder was tucked under my arm. Inside it were details about the job, the move, and the city. Nothing about a car. That part came later. I told my family that evening. My mother was proud. My brother made a joke about me finally becoming important. A couple friends tried to convince me not to go. Not seriously, just enough to let me know they'd miss me. That Friday, we met at a little place near my apartment. Nothing fancy. We'd been going there for years. The waitress knew what most of us were ordering before we sat down. At some point, one of my friends raised his glass and said, "To the big promotion." Everybody cheered. I smiled. I meant it when I said I was excited. I was. That's the thing people forget. Bad decisions don't always feel bad while you're making them. Sometimes they feel like progress. The next few weeks disappeared into boxes. I gave away things I didn't want to move. Sold a bookshelf, donated old clothes, found a stack of takeout menus from restaurants that had closed years earlier. Every room got a little emptier. The apartment started echoing. On my last night in Chicago, I slept on a mattress on the floor because the bed frame had already been taken apart. I couldn't sleep. The train passed outside. The radiator knocked. Somebody laughed on the sidewalk below. All the sounds I'd stopped noticing over the years suddenly felt important. I remember lying there thinking, what have I done? Not because I wanted to stay. Not exactly. It was more like realizing that one version of my life was ending before I understood what the next one would look like. The following morning, I locked the apartment door for the last time. I stood in the hallway for a second with the key still in my hand. Then I slid it through the mail slot for the landlord. That was it. 9 years ended with a little piece of metal dropping onto the floor on the other side of a door. A week later, I was sitting in a new apartment surrounded by boxes. The place was quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet. There's a difference. In Chicago, even when I was alone, there was always something happening outside. A bus. A train. People talking. A horn. This apartment sat in a complex where most of the buildings looked the same. Same balconies, same tan siding, same little patch of grass near every entrance. The silence made the refrigerator sound loud. I sat on the floor, eating noodles straight out of the carton. My couch hadn't arrived. Neither had my table. I had a legal pad resting on one of the moving boxes, and I started making a list. Internet, groceries, shower curtain, coffee maker, cleaning supplies, things I needed to do, things I needed to buy. Then I wrote one more line. Buy a car, 3 words. That was all. I didn't circle them, didn't underline them, didn't stop and think about what they might lead to. Why would I? In that city, owning a car wasn't unusual. It was necessary. The promotion led to the move. The move led to the apartment. The apartment led to that list. And that list led me to Lucy. Although I didn't know her name yet. What I learned after buying a used car. Chapter 2. Life Through a Windshield. If you've never moved to a city where driving is part of everyday life, it's hard to explain. Back in Chicago, I measured distance in minutes. That's a 10-minute walk. The train will be here in 5. I'll just grab a rideshare. Now, everything was measured in miles. The grocery store wasn't around the corner. It was 4 miles away. My office? Almost 12. The nearest hardware store? 8. Even getting a decent cup of coffee meant getting in a car. The first few days, I kept catching myself looking out the apartment window. Not because there was anything to see, because I was still expecting to watch people. In Chicago, there was always someone outside, walking a dog, waiting for the bus, talking on the sidewalk. Here, there were mostly parking lots, rows and rows of cars. People disappeared from one building, then reappeared inside another. It was strange. The city felt alive, but you rarely saw the people living in it. Everything happened through a windshield. Work was going well, busy, a little overwhelming, but good. Everyone had been welcoming. My manager introduced me around the office. I probably forgot half the names before lunch. One guy kept insisting I had to try the local barbecue. Another warned me not to trust my GPS because it always routed people through road construction. Little things. The kind that slowly make a place feel less unfamiliar. Every afternoon, I'd drive back to my apartment. then remember I didn't have a car. I'd laugh at myself. The rental car sat outside. It was included in the relocation package for 2 weeks. Nothing fancy, just something to get me around until I found my own. I didn't like it. Not because there was anything wrong with it, because it wasn't mine. Every time I parked it, I worried somebody would scratch it. Every strange noise made me wonder if I'd have to explain it. I wanted my own car. Not an expensive one. Not a new one. Just something dependable. Something that started every morning. That became my goal. Every evening after work, I'd eat dinner, unpack another box or two, then sit down with my laptop. Dealership websites, used car lots, private sellers. I looked at everything: pickup trucks, SUVs, little hatchbacks, cars with suspiciously low prices, cars with suspiciously high prices. Some listings had 20 pictures. Others had one blurry photo that looked like it had been taken through a dirty window. Some sellers wrote paragraphs. Others just listed the mileage and a phone number. After a while, they all started blending together. One night I called my brother. "Any luck?" "Not really." "You being too picky?" "I don't think so." "What are you looking for?" I thought about it. "I don't know. Just something reliable." He laughed. "Everybody says that." "I know, but that's really all I want." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Don't buy the first thing you see." "I won't. And don't buy with your emotions." "I won't do that either." Funny. Looking back, that's exactly what I thought I was doing. Being patient. Being practical. Making a smart decision. A couple days later, the rental company called. They wanted to know if I planned on extending the rental. I looked at the calendar. I only had 3 days left. "No," I said. "I think I'll have something by then." When I hung up, the pressure felt different. Buying a car wasn't just another item on my list anymore. It had become a deadline. That evening, I made myself a frozen pizza and opened my laptop again. I checked the dealership websites first. Nothing. Then the certified used lots. Still nothing that fit my budget. Finally, I found myself doing what almost everybody does sooner or later. I opened Marketplace. At first it felt like walking through a flea market. Thousands of listings. Thousands of strangers. Some looked honest. Some definitely didn't. One seller somehow managed to spell excellent 3 different ways in the same ad. Another wanted to meet behind a storage facility after dark. I skipped that one pretty fast. There were sports cars that looked like they'd lived hard lives. Luxury cars with prices that made no sense. Work trucks that probably deserved retirement. I must have looked at 50 listings that night. Maybe more. Then I stopped scrolling. Not because the picture was impressive. It wasn't. Just a gray sedan sitting in somebody's driveway. No dramatic angles, no shiny filters, no oversized wheels, just a car. The description was almost boring. Runs great, clean title, well-maintained. That was it. No long sales pitch, no story about how they hated to see it go, just the facts. I stared at the listing longer than any of the others. I still can't tell you why. Maybe it felt honest. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the wind had already started blowing the leaf. I clicked on the listing. Then I sent one simple message. "Is it still available?" Less than 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Yes, Saturday at 1, works if you're free." I smiled, typed back, "I'll be there." Then I closed my laptop. Looking back, I sometimes wonder how many other people looked at that same listing before I did. How many almost sent a message, then didn't. How many little decisions had to happen before that one conversation belonged to me. What I learned after buying a used car. Chapter 3, Lucy. Saturday couldn't get there fast enough. Not because I was excited, because I was tired of borrowing somebody else's car. The rental had to be back Monday morning. I wanted to spend Sunday getting familiar with whatever I bought. The address was about 25 minutes away. The farther I drove, the quieter the neighborhoods became. The apartment buildings slowly gave way to older homes. Big oak trees, wide front yards, kids shooting basketball in a driveway. A man washing his pickup truck while music played from his garage. It felt like one of those neighborhoods where people actually knew each other's names. I pulled up a few minutes early. The gray sedan was sitting in the driveway exactly like it had been in the pictures. Nothing about it stood out. No shiny paint, no custom wheels, no oversized spoiler, just an older gray sedan. If you drove past it, you probably wouldn't look twice. I almost didn't. Then the front door opened. A woman stepped outside and smiled. She looked to be in her late 50s, blue jeans, white tennis shoes, a gray sweatshirt with the sleeves pushed up to her elbows. Nothing about her looked unusual. She looked like somebody's mom, or maybe a retired schoolteacher. "You must be." She said my name. I smiled. "I am. And you must be." She laughed. "I guess we both know why you're here." There wasn't an awkward sales pitch, no pressure, no nervous energy. She simply handed me the keys. "Take your time. Look it over. If you want to drive it for an hour, drive it for an hour." I remember thinking, well, that's different. Most people stay close. They watch every little thing you do. She walked back toward the porch and sat down in a rocking chair, almost like she'd already decided the outcome. I started walking around the car. A couple small scratches near the trunk. One wheel had rubbed a curb somewhere along the way. Nothing major. Honestly, the little imperfections made me trust it more. It looked lived in, not abused, just used. I opened the driver's door. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not air freshener, not cigarette smoke. It smelled clean, like somebody had taken care of it. The driver's seat had a little wear on the left side where people slide in and out. The steering wheel was smooth. The radio looked original. There was a tiny crack near one of the air vents. Again, nothing unusual. I popped the hood. Everything looked exactly like you'd hope. No leaks, no strange smells. Battery looked fairly new. Oil was clean. Whoever owned this car hadn't ignored it. I climbed in, turned the key. The engine started immediately. Quiet, smooth, no warning lights, no rattles, just running. I pulled out of the driveway and spent almost 40 minutes driving around. Neighborhood streets, stop signs, traffic lights, a short stretch of highway. Everything felt solid. The steering was tighter than I expected. The brakes were smooth. The transmission shifted without any drama. I even tried hitting a few rough roads. No squeaks, no clunks, nothing. Halfway through the drive, I caught myself smiling. Not because it was exciting, because it wasn't. The car just worked. When I pulled back into her driveway, she was still sitting on the porch, reading a paperback book. She closed it when I got out. "What do you think?" I looked back at the car. "I think it's exactly what I've been looking for." She smiled. "I thought it might be." We sat at her kitchen table to finish the paperwork. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon. There wasn't much decorating. A coffee maker, a fruit bowl, a calendar on the refrigerator, a small plant over the sink. It felt comfortable, like a home someone had actually lived in. She disappeared into another room and came back carrying a thick manila folder. "I keep everything." She wasn't kidding. Oil changes, tire rotations, brake work, a new battery. Every receipt was neatly organized by year. My dad would have loved that. He kept folders exactly like that. As we worked through the paperwork, I noticed the owner's manual sitting on the table. It looked old. The corners were worn. When I picked it up, something slipped out. A faded yellow sticky note. Across the top, written in blue ink, was one word: Lucy. Underneath it was a mileage number. I looked at it for a second, then smiled. "Who's Lucy?" She looked down at the note, then laughed. "Oh, I forgot that was still in there." She shook her head. "I used to name my cars." I couldn't help smiling. "So Lucy." I nodded toward the driveway. "Is the car?" She laughed again. "I know. It sounds silly. I've always done it. My husband used to tease me about it." I handed the note back. "I guess everybody has their thing." She folded the sticky note once, then tucked it back inside the owner's manual. For some reason, she didn't throw it away. We finished signing the title. I counted out the money. She counted it once, then slid both sets of keys across the table. I reached for them. She didn't let go right away. Maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3. She looked past me, out the kitchen window, toward the driveway. Then she quietly said, "Can I give you one piece of advice?" "Sure." "If you ever find yourself arguing with Lucy," she smiled to herself, then corrected it, "with the car, just let it win." I laughed. "I'll try to remember that." She finally let go of the keys. "I hope you do." Driving away, I smiled to myself. She was probably one of those people who named everything. Cars, plants, maybe even the lawnmower. Funny. Looking back, that wasn't the part of the conversation I should have remembered, but somehow, it was the part that stayed with me. What I learned after buying a used car. Chapter 4. Learning to drive again. There's something humbling about realizing you've forgotten how to do something you used to take for granted. I knew how to drive. I'd had a license since I was 16. But knowing how to drive, and driving every single day, turned out to be two different things. Monday morning was my first commute with Lucy. I left almost 45 minutes early, not because the drive was that long, because I didn't trust myself yet. I plugged the office address into my GPS, backed out of the parking space, took a deep breath, and started driving. The first few miles were easy, then traffic picked up. 3 lanes became 5, 5 became 6. Cars were coming from every direction. Somebody changed lanes without signaling. Another driver cut across 3 lanes to make an exit. I remember laughing to myself. Welcome to your new city. The first week wasn't pretty. I bumped a curb pulling into a pharmacy. Not hard, just enough to make me wince. One afternoon, I turned on the windshield wipers instead of the turn signal. Another day, I parked at work, got halfway to the building, looked back, and realized I was taking up 2 parking spaces. I turned around, got back in, and fixed it. Nobody probably noticed. I did. Little mistakes have a way of feeling much bigger when you're the one making them. Every evening, I'd get a little better. Every morning, I'd feel a little more comfortable. The city slowly stopped looking like a maze. I learned which intersections stayed backed up after 5, which gas station had the cleanest bathrooms, which road looked like a shortcut, but always ended up taking longer. Funny how routines sneak into your life. Before long, Tuesday mornings meant stopping at the same little gas station, not because the gas was cheaper, because the woman behind the counter made fresh coffee. After a couple weeks, she'd see me walk through the door and already have a medium cup sitting on the counter. "Morning." "Morning." That was about the whole conversation. Some people would have called that boring. I liked it. It made a new city feel a little less new. Work settled into a rhythm too. I learned everybody's names. Mostly. There was a guy named Brian who never stopped talking. Didn't matter if it was football, weather, or lawn fertilizer. Brian had an opinion. There was another manager named Teresa. She'd lived there her whole life. Whenever I'd ask for a restaurant recommendation, she'd never tell me the fancy places. She'd tell me where the locals went. One afternoon she asked, "So, how's the new city treating you?" I shrugged. "I think I'm finally figuring it out." "And the driving?" I laughed. "I've hit exactly 2 curbs." She smiled. "That's actually pretty good." I wasn't sure if she was joking. Maybe she wasn't. Life started becoming ordinary again. I'd leave for work, come home, cook dinner, unpack another box, watch a little television, go to bed. Weekends were for laundry, groceries, vacuuming the apartment. Little by little, the moving boxes disappeared. The apartment finally started looking like somebody actually lived there. One Saturday morning, I decided to clean Lucy. Nothing special, just a bucket of soapy water, a sponge, a vacuum. I spent about an hour wiping down the dashboard, cleaning the windows, and vacuuming the carpet. While I was reaching under the passenger seat, I found a couple of pennies, an old grocery receipt, a pen that no longer worked, little pieces of someone else's life. I smiled. Used cars are funny that way. You never really own them first. You simply become the next chapter. When I finished, I stepped back and looked at her. The afternoon sun reflected off the hood. She looked good. Not brand new. Not perfect. Just well cared for. Almost without thinking, I found myself saying, "Not bad, Lucy." The words came out so naturally. I actually laughed. I shook my head. I've had this car 2 weeks, and I'm already talking to it. I remembered the woman at the kitchen table. She was probably laughing somewhere if she could see me. I grabbed the bucket, walked back toward the apartment, never gave it another thought. Looking back, I should have, because sometimes you don't notice you're changing until you hear yourself saying something you once thought only somebody else would say. What I learned after buying a used car. Chapter 5. The First Delay. You know how, after you've driven somewhere enough times, you stop thinking about the drive? Your body just kind of takes over. You know which lane to be in. You know where the potholes are. You know which traffic light seems to stay red forever. That's where I was. I'd been in the new city a little over 2 months. For the first time since moving, life actually felt normal. I wasn't getting lost anymore. The apartment finally felt like home. Work was going well. Lucy hadn't given me a single problem. No warning lights, no strange noises, nothing. If you'd asked me then, I'd have told you I'd found a great used car. Nothing more. One Tuesday morning started like every other Tuesday. I stopped for coffee. The woman behind the counter already had my cup waiting. "Morning." "Morning." She handed it over. I paid. Walked back outside. The air had that cool feeling that only lasts about an hour before the day starts heating up. I climbed into Lucy. Started the engine. Everything sounded exactly like it always did. I remember a leaf landing on the windshield, brown around the edges. Probably one of the first leaves of the season. I brushed it away with the wiper. Funny, I still remember that leaf. I don't remember what shirt I was wearing, or what I had for dinner that night, but I remember that leaf. I pulled onto the main road and headed toward work. Traffic was lighter than usual. The radio was on. Somebody was talking about the weather. I wasn't really listening. About 15 minutes into the drive, I pulled up behind another car at a red light. I'd been through that intersection dozens of times. Nothing unusual about it. The light turned green. The SUV in front of me pulled away. I lifted my foot off the brake. Lucy rolled forward. Then she hesitated. Not much. Maybe a second. The engine didn't stall. There wasn't a loud noise. It wasn't dramatic. It just didn't move quite when I expected it to. I frowned. Come on. Then she went, smooth as ever, like nothing had happened. I looked down at the dashboard. No warning lights. Temperature was fine. Everything looked normal. By the time I reached work, I'd already convinced myself it was bad gas. Or maybe I'd imagined it. Old cars do little things. That's part of owning one. Around lunchtime, I walked into the break room. Brian was standing by the television. The local news was on. Traffic is still backed up after this morning's industrial explosion. I wasn't paying much attention until they showed the map. My stomach tightened. It was the same intersection. The reporter said a delivery truck carrying industrial supplies had been struck after another driver ran a red light. The impact caused a fire and a small explosion. Several people were taken to the hospital. The intersection was expected to remain closed for hours. Brian shook his head. Man, can you imagine being stuck in that? I stared at the screen a little longer than I probably should have. According to the timeline, the accident happened just after I'd gone through. Or just after I would have gone through, depending on how long Lucy had hesitated. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe less. Brian looked over at me. You all right? Yeah. I drive through there every morning, he nodded. Glad you missed it. Missed it. Funny choice of words. I didn't say anything. I grabbed my lunch out of the refrigerator and sat down. The whole time, I kept replaying that tiny hesitation. 1 second, maybe 2. That's all. That evening I took the long way home, not because I was avoiding the intersection, because it was still closed. Police cars, fire trucks, orange barricades, workers sweeping debris off the road. Everything looked ordinary again, just damaged. When I got home, I shut the engine off but didn't get out right away. I rested both hands on the steering wheel, looked through the windshield. Then I laughed, quietly, at myself. "You're really doing this?" I said out loud. "You think an old car just saved you from an accident?" I shook my head. "No, that's ridiculous." I grabbed my work bag and headed upstairs. That should have been the end of it. It would have been if I hadn't remembered something while I was brushing my teeth that night. The woman at her kitchen table. She hadn't said, "If the car ever breaks down." She hadn't said, "If the car ever starts making funny noises." She'd said, "If you ever find yourself arguing with the car, just let it win." I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Then I smiled. She's probably told that story to everybody who's ever bought one of her cars. That explanation made me feel a whole lot better. Looking back, I think I wanted that explanation to be true more than I actually believed it. What I learned after buying a used car. Chapter 6. Looking for an explanation. You know what's funny? Your brain will work a whole lot harder trying to explain something than it will trying to believe it. That was me. I wasn't thinking, the car did that. I wasn't even close. I was thinking, there has to be a reason. Maybe the gas wasn't as good as I thought. Maybe I lifted my foot off the brake a little slower than I remembered. Maybe the engine hesitated because it was getting older. Every explanation sounded better than the alternative. Life went back to normal. At least, it looked normal. I still drove to work, still stopped for coffee every Tuesday, still vacuumed the apartment on Saturday mornings, still watched football on Sundays. Lucy never stumbled again. Not once. That somehow bothered me more than if she'd done it every day. If it happened all the time, I'd have taken her to a mechanic. Problem solved. Instead, nothing. It was almost like the hesitation had never happened. About a week later, I remembered the folder. The one the previous owner had handed me across her kitchen table. "I keep everything." Those were her words. She wasn't kidding. I pulled the folder out of my filing cabinet and spread everything across the coffee table. Oil changes, tire rotations, brake pads, a new battery. Every receipt neatly organized. You could almost follow the history of the car one repair at a time. Then I noticed something. Every receipt, every inspection, every oil change had come from the same repair shop, same owner, same address, for more than 10 years. That caught my attention. People usually change mechanics. They move. They try someplace closer. Somebody recommends another shop. She never did. The following Saturday, I drove over there. It wasn't one of those big chain repair places. Just 3 service bays. A faded sign that had probably looked new 20 years earlier. An old soda machine out front. The kind of place where people still knew the owner's first name. An older man was sitting behind the counter reading the newspaper. He looked up over the top of his glasses. "Need some help?" I handed him one of the receipts. "I bought this car a few months ago. I was just wondering if you remembered it." He looked at the receipt. Then out the front window toward Lucy. He smiled. "Oh, yeah. I remember her." That surprised me. "You do?" He nodded. "Worked on that car for years. Good little car. Reliable. I've always liked that one." I smiled. "So far, I can't complain." "You won't." He folded the newspaper and set it aside. "What can I do for you?" I hesitated. Honestly, I almost didn't ask. Then I figured, why not? I was just curious. Did the previous owner ever have any unusual problems with it? He scratched the side of his face. "Depends what you mean by unusual." "I don't know." "Electrical, engine, transmission." He shook his head. "No, nothing like that." "So, you never found anything wrong?" He laughed. Oh, she thought she did. That got my attention. "What do you mean?" Every now and then she'd bring it in. Tell me something felt different. One day it was the steering. Another day she'd say it wasn't accelerating the same. Once she swore the brakes felt different. "What was wrong?" He smiled. "Nothing. I'd test drive it. Put it on the lift. Check everything. And every time. I handed her the keys back. Couldn't find a thing. I looked through the office window at Lucy sitting in the parking lot. So it never acted up for you? Nope. Never once? He leaned back in his chair. I finally started telling her. Sometimes a car just feels different. I nodded. That made sense, probably more sense than anything else. Then he asked, why? Has she been giving you trouble? I thought about the hesitation, the accident, the timing. Then I heard myself answer, no, not really. And that was the truth. She hadn't given me trouble, not exactly. As I stood to leave, he called after me. Hold on. I turned around. He smiled. You know why I remember that car? I shrugged. No. Because she loved it. He pointed toward the parking lot. I've had customers buy brand new cars every 3 years. They couldn't tell you what color floor mats came in them. But her. She knew every little sound, every little vibration. She took care of that car, he chuckled. Sometimes I think she took better care of it than she did herself. I laughed. She seemed nice. He nodded. She was. I thanked him for his time and headed for the door. My hand was already on the handle when one last question crossed my mind. I turned back. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you know why she sold it? For the first time since I'd walked in, he didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window, at Lucy, then back at me. No, he said quietly. She just told me. He paused. It was time for somebody else to drive. Driving home. I couldn't stop thinking about those words. Not because they sounded mysterious, because they sounded final, like she'd already made peace with something. I still didn't think there was anything strange about Lucy. I honestly didn't. But for the first time, I started wondering if the previous owner had been trying to explain something, or trying to accept something she couldn't explain herself. What I learned after buying a used car. Chapter 7. The phone call. For the next couple of weeks, I tried not to think about it. The mechanic hadn't found anything. The car drove perfectly. Every logical explanation still made more sense than the one quietly sitting in the back of my mind. Life settled down again. Work was busy. The apartment finally felt like mine. I'd even started hanging pictures on the walls. Funny, it wasn't until I started putting holes in those walls that I realized I might actually stay there a while. Lucy never gave me another reason to question her. She started every morning, ran smooth, didn't burn oil. The air conditioner was cold enough to make you turn it down after a few minutes. Honestly, if somebody asked me about the car, I'd recommend it. One Saturday afternoon, I was going through paperwork, trying to organize a filing cabinet. Tax documents, insurance papers, the owner's manual, that thick maintenance folder. I almost put it away. Then I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. The bill of sale. Across the top, written in the previous owner's handwriting, was her phone number. I'd completely forgotten she'd written it there. I stared at it for a while. Part of me thought, leave it alone. The other part just wanted to understand, not prove anything, just understand. I picked up my phone, dialed the number. It rang twice, 3 times. Then she answered. Hello? For a second, I almost hung up. I'm sorry to bother you. This is probably a strange call. A short pause. You bought Lucy. She didn't ask. She knew. Yeah. How's she doing? Funny. Most people would have asked, how are you liking the car? She didn't. She asked how Lucy was doing. She's been great, I said. Honestly, no complaints. I figured. There was something comforting about hearing her voice again, like talking to an old neighbor. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then I asked, can I ask you something? You already are. She laughed softly. So go ahead. I smiled. Fair enough. Why did you really sell her? The laughter disappeared. I was wondering when you'd ask. I leaned back in my chair. So, why? She didn't answer. Instead, she asked, has she ever done anything that made you stop for a second? I frowned. What do you mean? I don't know. Started a little slower. Hesitated. Made you take a different road. Something about the way she said it made me sit up a little straighter. I had one strange thing happen. The intersection? My stomach tightened. How did you know? I didn't, she said quietly. I guessed. Another silence. Then she asked, Did anybody get hurt? A few people were taken to the hospital. I saw it on the news. She let out a slow breath. I'm glad you weren't there. That sentence stayed with me, not because it sounded mysterious, because it sounded sincere, like she'd genuinely been relieved. I talked to your mechanic. I figured you would. He said he never found anything wrong. He never did. Then why did you keep bringing Lucy in? She laughed, not because anything was funny, because she'd probably asked herself the same question 100 times. Because I kept thinking. This time, he'd find something. And? He never did. I looked out my apartment window. Lucy was parked in her usual spot. Nothing about her looked unusual. Gray paint, a couple scratches. Same little crack near the air vent. Just a car. I've got another question. I know, she said. I know you do. Did you really believe something was happening? She was quiet for so long I thought maybe she'd ended the call. Finally, she answered, I don't know. That wasn't the answer I expected. I used to think I did. Then I'd convince myself I was imagining things. Then something else would happen. So I'd believe it again. I spent 11 years doing that. She paused. I never won the argument. What argument? The one with myself. I didn't know what to say. She continued, You know what finally changed? What? I stopped trying to explain Lucy and started paying attention to myself. I frowned. I don't understand. I know. I didn't either. Not for a long time. She sighed. Promise me something. Okay. If you ever catch yourself arguing with Lucy, don't argue because you're afraid. I waited. She finished the sentence almost in a whisper. Argue because you're certain. I frowned. I'm not sure I follow. You will, she said gently. Or maybe you won't. I honestly hope you never have to. Before I could ask another question, she said, It was nice hearing from you. Take care of her. Then the line went quiet. I sat there for a long time with the phone still in my hand, looking out at Lucy, thinking about something she'd said. I stopped trying to explain Lucy and started paying attention to myself. At the time, I didn't really understand what she meant. Looking back, I think that was the moment the story quietly changed. Until then, I'd been watching the car. I had no idea. The next part of the story was really about me. What I learned after buying a used car. Chapter 8. Watching myself. It's funny how quickly your perspective can change. A month earlier, if Lucy made a funny noise, I'd turn the radio up. Now, I'd turn the radio off. I started paying attention, not because I thought something was wrong, because I wanted to understand. Every little vibration, every shift between gears. Every time I came to a stop, every sound the engine made. If the steering wheel felt a little different, I noticed. If I thought the brakes grabbed a little sooner, I noticed. If the engine idled 100 RPM higher than usual, I noticed that too. The problem was, once you start looking for patterns, you start finding them everywhere, even when they probably don't exist. Or maybe, especially then, for a while, nothing happened. Weeks went by. Life was wonderfully ordinary. Work, home, laundry, football, groceries, coffee on Tuesdays, the same route, the same parking space, the same apartment. I almost started feeling embarrassed about the whole thing. Maybe I'd built an entire mystery around one strange coincidence. Maybe the previous owner had done the same thing. Maybe that's just what people do. Maybe we all need stories to explain things we can't. Then Friday afternoon came. I'd worked a little later than usual. Nothing major, just trying to finish a report before the weekend. By the time I left the office, rush hour had already started. The grocery store was on the way home. I needed bread, milk, coffee, nothing exciting. I wandered the aisles a little longer than normal, couldn't decide what I wanted for dinner. Eventually, I grabbed a frozen pizza, paid, loaded everything into the trunk, climbed into Lucy. The parking lot was busy, people pushing shopping carts, parents trying to keep up with little kids, somebody loading bags into the back of an SUV. Just life. I backed out of the parking space, started toward the exit. Then I stopped. There wasn't a stop sign. Nobody walked in front of me. There wasn't another car blocking the way. I just stopped. Maybe 2 seconds. Maybe 3. The guy behind me gave a quick tap on his horn. Not angry, just enough to say, "Keep it moving." I remember smiling. "All right. I'm going." I eased onto the gas and pulled out. By the time I got home, I'd forgotten all about it. About an hour later, my brother called. "You busy?" "Not really." "You hear what happened over by that shopping center?" "No." There was some kind of explosion. "What?" "They're still trying to figure it out. Something inside one of the restaurants. Several people got hurt. They evacuated the whole strip center." I felt my stomach tighten. "When?" He told me. It would have been right about the time I'd been leaving. Maybe a little after. Maybe a little before. I honestly didn't know. After we hung up, I stood at the kitchen sink looking out the window. Lucy was parked exactly where she'd always been. The evening sun reflected off the windshield. She looked completely ordinary. I laughed, quietly. "You're doing it again," I said to myself. "You're connecting things that don't belong together." That made more sense. It had to. Then I remembered something the previous owner said. I spent 11 years arguing with myself. Not the car, herself. I thought about that for a long time. Maybe that's what I'd been doing too. Maybe this whole thing wasn't changing the way I looked at Lucy. Maybe it was changing the way I looked at my own decisions. That thought bothered me more than anything else, because I couldn't remember deciding to stop. I only remembered being stopped. Looking back, I think that's where the story quietly changed direction. Up until then, I'd been trying to understand the car. After that evening, I started trying to understand the person behind the steering wheel. Me. What I learned after buying a used car. Chapter 9. The Wrong Question. You know what I think the biggest mistake people make is? We assume every mystery has an answer. Sometimes. The mystery is the answer. For weeks after talking to the previous owner, nothing happened. Not one strange delay. Not one hesitation. Lucy started every morning. Drove exactly the way she always had. If anything, she drove better than ever. Looking back, I think that's what made me relax. The human mind can't stay on high alert forever. Eventually, it gets tired. Eventually, it decides everything is probably okay. Mine did. By now, I'd lived in the new city almost a year. I had a favorite barber, a favorite waitress. I knew which grocery store had the best produce. I even had a regular parking spot at work. Funny how a place slowly stops feeling temporary. One Friday afternoon, my manager stopped by my office. "You heading home?" "In a few minutes." "Mind dropping these folders off at our other office?" "No problem." It was only about 20 minutes away. I'd never been there before, but the GPS would get me there. I grabbed the folders, climbed into Lucy, started driving. About halfway there, I missed my turn. Not because the GPS was wrong, because I was thinking about something else. I sighed. Great. I drove another mile before I found a place to turn around. It probably cost me 3 minutes, maybe 4. I remember being annoyed, not angry, just enough to shake my head. As I came back toward the intersection I'd missed, everything was stopped. Police cars, fire trucks, an ambulance. Traffic backed up in every direction. I rolled my window down. The man in the pickup truck beside me did the same. "What happened?" I asked. He pointed ahead. "Construction crew hit a gas line. They're saying there was an explosion. You can't get through." I thanked him and followed the detour signs. The whole way to the office, I kept thinking about one thing. If I hadn't missed that turn, I would have reached that intersection just a few minutes earlier. Maybe while crews were still working. Maybe before the road was shut down. Maybe nothing would have happened. I honestly didn't know. That was becoming the hardest part. I never knew. That evening I drove home in complete silence. No radio. No podcast. Just the sound of the tires on the pavement. When I got home, I didn't go inside right away. I sat there with both hands resting on the steering wheel. The previous owner's words came back to me. I spent 11 years asking the wrong question. I think, for the first time, I understood what she meant. The wrong question wasn't, is Lucy protecting me? That question assumes you already know what's happening. I didn't. Neither did she. The better question was, what am I trying so hard to prove? Was I trying to prove the car was special? Or was I trying to prove the world made sense? Because if every strange thing had a logical explanation, then life felt predictable, safe, comfortable. If it didn't, well, that was a different conversation. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and laughed. Not because anything was funny, because I finally realized I'd spent months trying to win an argument with myself, just like she had. I climbed out of the car, locked the door, walked a few steps toward my apartment, then stopped. I turned around and looked back at Lucy. Gray paint. A couple scratches near the trunk. The same little crack in the air vent. She looked exactly the way she had the day I bought her. Nothing about her looked mysterious. Nothing about her looked unusual. She was just a used car. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the mystery had never been sitting in the parking lot. Maybe it had been sitting behind the steering wheel all along. Looking back, that was the day I stopped trying to solve Lucy and quietly began trying to understand myself. What I learned after buying a used car. Chapter 10, Trying to be Wrong. I'll be honest. By then, I wanted to be wrong. Not a little wrong. Completely wrong. I wanted somebody to tell me I'd moved to a new city, started a stressful job, bought an older car. And my brain was simply connecting dots that had nothing to do with each other. That would have been a relief. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to look for patterns anymore. No more replaying conversations with the previous owner. No more wondering why Lucy hesitated. No more watching the local news every night. I was done. Or at least, I told myself I was. Funny thing about trying not to think about something. It usually means you're thinking about it all the time. Life got busy. Quarter end at work always did that. Long days, long meetings, long email chains that somehow could have been one phone call. By the time I got home most evenings, I was too tired to think about anything. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. Lucy behaved exactly the way a good used car should. Reliable, predictable, quiet. The mystery, if there had ever been one, started fading. One Thursday afternoon, my manager stopped by my office. Running home after work? That's the plan. He handed me a small envelope. Can you drop this by the downtown office? No problem. It wasn't out of my way. Maybe 15 extra minutes. I tossed the envelope onto the passenger seat and headed downstairs. The drive started like every other drive. Traffic, red lights, people trying to beat yellow lights that had clearly already turned red. About halfway there, I looked down at the fuel gauge. Just under half a tank. Plenty. I didn't need gas. Not even close. I drove another block. Then, without really thinking about it, I pulled into a gas station. I can't tell you why. I wasn't low. Gas wasn't unusually cheap. I wasn't planning ahead. I just turned in. I filled the tank, bought a bottle of water, walked back outside. As I climbed into Lucy, my phone rang. It was Brian. Hey, you still downtown? Not yet. I'm at a customer's office. You hear what happened? What happened? There was some kind of transformer explosion. Knocked out power to half the business district. They've got streets blocked off everywhere. I felt that familiar tightening in my stomach. Which streets? He named them, the exact route I'd planned on taking. I looked at the gas pump, then at the receipt in my hand. 5 minutes, maybe 6. That's all I'd lost. Or all I'd gained. After we hung up, I just sat there, the engine idling quietly, bottle of water in the cup holder, hands resting on the steering wheel. I looked down at the fuel gauge. It was full. It hadn't needed to be, not today, not even tomorrow. I laughed, not because I thought Lucy had done something impossible, because I realized I'd run out of explanations. I wasn't convinced, not yet, but I was running out of reasons to dismiss everything. The drive home took almost an hour because of the detours. I didn't mind. For the first time in months, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just driving. When I pulled into my apartment complex, I shut the engine off and stayed there for a while. The parking lot was quiet. A couple kids were throwing a football between two buildings. Someone was grilling burgers on a small patio. Ordinary life. I rested one hand on the steering wheel. Almost without thinking, I said, "Thanks." The word slipped out before I even realized I'd said it. I smiled, then immediately shook my head. "Who are you talking to?" I laughed again, got out, locked the door, started walking toward my apartment. Halfway there, I stopped, turned around. Lucy sat exactly where I'd left her. Gray, ordinary, forgettable. If someone had walked through that parking lot, they would have never given her a second look. Maybe that's how the biggest changes in our lives always arrive, quietly, without asking for attention. Looking back, I think that was the first day I stopped trying to decide whether Lucy was changing my life, and started wondering if she'd simply arrived at exactly the moment my life was ready to change. What I learned after buying a used car. Chapter 11. Becoming Her. You know something I never expected? It wasn't the strange moments that changed me. It was all the ordinary ones. The mystery didn't become bigger. It became quieter. Months passed, then a year, then another. Lucy never left me stranded, never overheated, never broke down on the side of the road. Outside of normal maintenance, she never asked for much. Oil changes, tires, brake pads, the usual things every car eventually needs. One Saturday morning, I drove over to the same little repair shop. The old mechanic looked up from behind the counter. "Morning, morning. Oil change? You know me too well." He laughed. "I've been doing this a long time." While Lucy was in the shop, I wandered across the street and grabbed a cup of coffee. I found myself sitting by the window where I could see the service bays. Funny, I realized I always watched while they worked on her. Not because I didn't trust them, because I wanted to make sure everything was all right. That thought made me smile. The previous owner used to do the same thing, the mechanic had told me. She knew every little sound. I remembered laughing when he said it. Now, here I was, watching through a coffee shop window, doing exactly what she'd done. When the mechanic handed me the keys, he smiled. "She's still one of my favorites." "I think she's becoming one of mine." He nodded. I figured. I drove home, spent the afternoon mowing the lawn. Then, almost without thinking, I pulled the hose around front. Lucy wasn't dirty. Not really. A little dust, some pollen, nothing worth worrying about. I washed her anyway. Bucket, soap, old sponge. The same way I'd watched my dad wash his truck when I was a kid. Top first. Windows, hood, doors, wheels last. No particular reason, just the way he'd always done it. After I dried everything off, I opened the driver's door to vacuum the inside. While I was wiping down the dashboard, my hand stopped. There, tucked inside the owner's manual, was the faded yellow sticky note. Lucy. The ink had faded even more. I smiled. For some reason, I never put that note back in the filing cabinet. It always stayed in the glove box, almost like it belonged there. I held it for a second, then slipped it back where I'd found it. That evening my brother called. "What have you been up to?" "Nothing. Clean the house. Wash the car." He laughed. "The car needed it?" "Not really." "So why'd you wash it?" I looked out the apartment window. Lucy sat in her usual parking spot. The late afternoon sun reflected off the windshield. I shrugged. "I don't know. I just felt like it." He laughed again. "You sound old." "I probably am." After we hung up, I kept thinking about what he'd said. Not because he'd called me old, because I'd answered without thinking. I just felt like it. Looking back, that wasn't really the answer. The truth was, Lucy had quietly become part of my routine. Just like Tuesday morning coffee, just like grocery shopping on Fridays, just like calling my mom every Sunday afternoon. She wasn't special. She wasn't magical. She was simply part of my life. That night I walked out to the parking lot to grab something I'd forgotten. As I passed Lucy, I reached out and rested my hand on the roof. Not because I meant to. It just happened. The same way you'd pat an old dog's head as you walked by. The same way you'd straighten a picture frame that wasn't crooked. A completely ordinary gesture. Then I froze, because I suddenly remembered something. The previous owner, the kitchen, the paperwork. She'd done the exact same thing. When I'd driven away, she'd rested her hand on the roof for just a second. At the time, I thought she was saying goodbye to a car. Standing there in the parking lot, I realized something. Maybe she wasn't saying goodbye. Maybe she was saying, take care of her. Or maybe she was thanking Lucy for taking care of her. I honestly don't know. I never asked. And if I'm being truthful, by then, I didn't think the answer would have changed anything. Because somewhere along the way, without noticing, I'd stopped wondering why she named her car. And I'd started understanding why. What I learned after buying a used car. Chapter 12. Living with the Question. Some stories end when the mystery is solved. Mine didn't. Mine changed when I stopped needing it to be solved. By then, I'd owned Lucy for almost 4 years. 4 years. Funny, when I bought her, I wasn't even sure I'd keep her 4 months. Now I couldn't imagine my life without her. Not because I thought she was special, because she'd quietly become part of my routine. Every Monday morning, she took me to work. Every Friday, she carried groceries home. Every Sunday, she took me to my mother's when she came to visit. Vacations, hardware store runs, late-night drives when I couldn't sleep. She was there for all of it. Life has a funny way of making ordinary things important. Not all at once. A little at a time. Every now and then, something would happen. I'd leave the house 5 minutes later than usual. A road would be closed. A traffic light would stay red longer than it normally did. I'd miss a turn because I was thinking about something else. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you could point to and say, there. That's proof. Just life. At first I'd wonder. Then I'd catch myself. Maybe it meant something. Maybe it didn't. Either way, I still had to be at work by 8. That's another thing I learned. Life doesn't stop just because you have questions. Bills still show up. The grass still needs mowing. The laundry still needs folding. People still expect you at meetings. Mysteries don't excuse you from living. One afternoon, Brian climbed into the passenger seat after lunch. His truck was in the shop. Mind giving me a ride back? Not at all. As we drove, he looked around. This thing's in good shape. Thanks. What year is it? I told him. He nodded. You thinking about trading up anytime soon? I glanced over at Lucy's dashboard. I don't know. Probably not. He laughed. You've gotten attached. I guess. Nothing wrong with that. He looked out the window. My dad drove the same truck for almost 20 years. Said once you trusted a vehicle, there wasn't much reason to replace it. I smiled. Your dad sounds like he'd have gotten along with the previous owner. Brian laughed. The lady you bought it from? Yeah. What was she like? I thought about that for a second. Kind, patient, ordinary. Finally, I said, she was the kind of person who took care of things. He nodded. Not enough people like that anymore. After I dropped him off, I sat at a red light. The same kind of red light I'd sat at 1,000 times before. I rested my hands on the steering wheel. Then I looked down. Without realizing it, my thumb had been rubbing the smooth spot in the leather where years of driving had worn it down. I wondered, had her thumb rested there too? Had she sat at lights just like this? Thinking about work, wondering what to make for dinner, completely unaware that someday, a stranger would be asking questions about her life. It's odd what survives us. Sometimes it isn't photographs, sometimes it isn't furniture. Sometimes it's the little habits we leave behind, the way we organize a folder, the way we care for something, the words we use, the routines we build. Maybe that's what we really pass on. Not answers, habits. That evening, I pulled into my apartment complex just as the sun was starting to set. The parking lot glowed orange for a few minutes before everything turned blue. I shut the engine off. The familiar quiet settled around me. I didn't get out right away. I never really planned those moments. They just happened. I looked through the windshield. Then I smiled. I still don't know. I said it quietly. Not to Lucy. Not to anyone. Just out loud. I still don't know. And for the first time since buying that car, those words didn't bother me. They felt honest. Looking back, I think that's when I finally understood something. Peace doesn't always come from finding the answer. Sometimes it comes from finally asking a question you're willing to leave unanswered. What I learned after buying a used car. Chapter 13. Another domino. Life has a way of repeating itself. Not exactly, just close enough that you notice. I'd been with the company a little over 4 years when my manager stopped by my office one Thursday afternoon. "You got a minute?" I laughed. "You know, I still hate it when someone starts a conversation like that." He smiled. "Relax. You're not in trouble." Funny. Those were almost the exact same words my old boss had said back in Chicago. For just a second, it felt like I'd stepped backward in time. I followed him into his office. He closed the door, then slid a folder across the desk. "I've got an opportunity for you." I just looked at it, didn't open it. "Not yet." "Promotion?" He smiled. "You've been here long enough to know how this works." I laughed. "Yeah, I guess I have." The position was exactly what I'd been working toward. More responsibility, a bigger team, better pay, everything I'd wanted. There was just one catch. I'd have to relocate. Again. I couldn't help it. I laughed. "What?" my manager asked. "Nothing. It's just, I've been here before." He probably thought I meant another promotion. I didn't. I meant another beginning, another apartment, another city, another list, another leaf letting go of another branch. I drove home that evening thinking about Chicago. The old apartment, the train, the flower vendor, the little restaurant where my friends took me before I left. Funny. For years I thought leaving Chicago had been the biggest decision of my life. Looking back, it was only the first one. When I got home, I sat on the couch for almost an hour. The folder rested on the coffee table. I already knew what was inside. The salary, the benefits, the relocation package, the new city. I smiled, then looked out the window. Lucy was parked in her usual spot, the same spot she'd occupied for years. Almost without thinking, I said, "Well, I guess we're moving." The words came out so naturally, it took me a second to realize what I'd said. Not, "I guess I'm moving." "We're moving." I laughed, shook my head. "You really have become one of those people." The previous owner would have loved that. The next few weeks disappeared into cardboard boxes. Again, books, dishes, lamps, winter coats. The apartment slowly emptied itself. Every room started echoing again, just like Chicago. Funny how life circles back around. One Saturday morning, I decided to have a yard sale. Mostly furniture, a few tools, some kitchen stuff I hadn't used in years. The kind of things that aren't worth moving across the country. I bought one of those bright orange for sale signs from the hardware store. The kind with the little metal legs you stick into the ground. As I carried it outside, my hands were full. Coffee in one hand, the sign under my arm, a box balanced against my hip. Without thinking, I leaned the sign against Lucy's front bumper while I unlocked the garage. Then I walked inside. A few minutes later, I came back out carrying another box. I stopped. The sign was still resting against the bumper. For just a second, I stared at it. If someone had walked by right then, They would have thought the sign belonged to Lucy. The thought hit me harder than I expected. Sell Lucy? The idea felt wrong. Not scary, not impossible, just wrong. I smiled to myself, picked up the sign, walked past Lucy, and pushed it into the grass near the sidewalk. It had never been for her. It was for the old couch, the lawnmower, the dining room table. Everything else in my life was replaceable. Lucy wasn't. I reached out and rested my hand on the roof. Just for a second. Thought so, I said quietly. Then I grabbed another box and carried it toward the garage. Looking back, that little orange sign probably told me more about how much I'd changed than anything else that had happened over the previous 4 years. What I learned after buying a used car. Chapter 14, The Drive. The moving truck left just after sunrise. I watched it disappear around the corner. Funny. The first time I'd moved, I stood there wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. This time, I just stood there smiling. Maybe that's what experience does. It doesn't answer your questions. It just teaches you which ones aren't worth asking anymore. The apartment was empty. Completely empty. I walked from room to room one last time. The bedroom echoed. The living room echoed. Even the refrigerator had already been hauled away. There wasn't much left. Just a few cleaning supplies, a broom, and my keys. I took one last look around, turned off the lights, closed the door, locked it. For a second, I stood there holding the key. Almost exactly the way I'd stood outside my apartment in Chicago years earlier. Only this time, I didn't hesitate. I slipped the key into the office Dropbox. Heard it hit the bottom. And that was that. Another chapter. Over. I walked across the parking lot. Lucy was waiting where she'd always waited. The morning sun reflected across the hood. She looked exactly the same as the day I bought her. Gray paint, a couple scratches near the trunk, the tiny crack by the passenger side air vent. 4 years older. So was I. I loaded the last overnight bag into the trunk, closed it, walked around to the driver's door, then stopped. There was something I'd forgotten. I reached into the glove box, pulled out the owner's manual, opened it. The faded yellow sticky note was still tucked inside. Lucy. The ink had almost disappeared. I smiled, folded the note once, placed it back exactly where I'd found it. Some things don't belong in a filing cabinet. They belong where they were always meant to be. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine. The familiar hum filled the silence. No warning lights, no hesitation, just ready. I pulled out of the parking lot for the last time. The city slowly disappeared behind me. The coffee shop, the grocery store, the repair shop, the office, the apartment complex. One by one, places that had once been completely unfamiliar were now disappearing in the rearview mirror. That's another funny thing about life. One day, you're asking strangers where everything is. A few years later, you're giving directions. Somewhere around lunchtime, I pulled into a rest area. Nothing special. A couple picnic tables, a vending machine, a handful of travelers stretching their legs. I bought a bottle of water, walked back outside. Leaning against Lucy's door, I watched leaves blowing across the parking lot. Some skidded across the pavement. Others caught little gusts of wind and danced in circles before settling down again. I smiled. There was that leaf again. Or maybe there had always been leaves. I was just finally paying attention. I finished my water, climbed back into the driver's seat, rested both hands on the steering wheel. Then I caught myself. Without thinking, my thumb found that same smooth spot in the leather, the spot worn down by years of driving. Maybe mine. Maybe hers. Probably both. I looked through the windshield, then quietly said, "Come on, Lucy. We've got a long drive." I laughed the second the words left my mouth. Years earlier, I'd smiled when the previous owner admitted she'd named her car. I'd thought, she's one of those people. Funny how life works. Sometimes you don't notice you've become someone until you catch yourself saying the very thing you once smiled about. I shifted into drive. pulled back onto the highway and watched another city slowly appear on the horizon. Looking back, I don't think I was driving toward a new beginning. I think I was simply following another domino that had already started falling. What I learned after buying a used car. Chapter 15, The Wind. People still ask me about Lucy. Not often. Just every once in a while. Usually when someone notices how old she is. You still driving that thing? I just smile. Yep. Still runs. They usually laugh. Tell me I ought to buy something newer, safer, quieter. Maybe they're right. I've looked, a couple times actually. Walked through dealerships, sat behind the wheel of newer cars. Cars with heated seats, big touch screens, backup cameras that practically park the car for you. Nice cars. Really nice cars. But every time, I'd thank the salesperson. Walk back outside, climb into Lucy, and drive home. Not because I thought she'd do something another car couldn't, because she already had. She'd carried me through one chapter of my life. Now she was carrying me through another. Maybe someday that'll change. Maybe one morning she'll refuse to start. Maybe an engine repair won't make financial sense. Maybe life will make the decision for me. That's usually how life works. Until then, I'm not in a hurry. You know, for a long time I told people this story was about a car. Then I thought it was about coincidence. After that, I convinced myself it was about intuition. The older I get, the less certain I become about any of those answers. Maybe Lucy really was just an ordinary used car. Maybe every strange thing had a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe I simply noticed the moments that fit the story and forgot the ones that didn't. That's possible. It's also possible that there are parts of life we'll never fully understand. I'm okay with either answer, because somewhere along the way, I stopped needing one. Remember that leaf I told you about? The one that drifts across the yard? When I was younger, I thought the mystery was where it landed. Now, I think the mystery is everything that happened before it let go. The branch, the wind, the season, the weight of the rain, the bird that landed on the limb that morning, the summer that made the wood a little weaker. 1,000 little things, none of which looked important by themselves, until they were. Maybe that's all our lives really are. Not one big decision, 1,000 small ones, quietly leaning us toward places we never expected to go, toward people we'd never planned to meet, toward opportunities we almost passed up, toward conversations we nearly didn't have, toward a used car on Marketplace, toward a woman who named that car Lucy, toward a life that couldn't have happened any other way. Sometimes I wonder, what would have happened if I'd stayed in Chicago? Maybe I'd still be in that same apartment, still hearing the train every night, still walking to work, still buying groceries I could carry home in 2 bags. Maybe I'd be happier. Maybe I wouldn't. I'll never know. And that's all right, because life doesn't let you live both stories. You only get one branch, one leaf, one direction. I used to think the hardest part of growing older was accepting the decisions I'd made. I don't believe that anymore. I think the hardest part is accepting the decisions I'll never get to make, the roads I'll never drive, the cities I'll never live in, the people I'll never meet. That's true for all of us. Every yes quietly creates 100 no's. Every path forward leaves another one behind. Maybe that's what the previous owner had figured out before I ever met her. Maybe that's why she smiled when she handed me the keys. Not because she knew something I didn't, because she'd learned to make peace with not knowing. I think that's what she was trying to give me. Not a car, not a warning, perspective. These days, when I climb behind the wheel, I don't wonder whether Lucy is changing my life. I don't wonder if she's protecting me. I don't wonder if she's haunted. I simply start the engine, put one hand on the steering wheel, look toward wherever I'm headed that day, and drive. Because after all these years, I finally understand something. The car was never really the story. The story was every quiet decision, every ordinary moment, every invisible dependency that eventually led me to Lucy. And maybe, just maybe, what we call coincidence is really just 1,000 little decisions finally catching up to us.